Welcome to the New Build podcast, presented by Bubble. I'm Abhinav Narain, and today is our final episode of Season 1. From the start, the premise of the show has been that the playbook for entrepreneurship is changing thanks to evolutions in AI, software, and culture. Over the last 11 episodes, we've spoken to entrepreneurs of all kinds for their perspective on this change, and today is no different. But instead of one interview, I'm sitting down for 3 shorter conversations with the founders behind 3 different startups. All different industries, all unique stories, but there's a few threads they share that we think you'll really enjoy, and the biggest thing they all have in common, they've all bet on building native mobile apps to anchor their business model. As always, stay tuned for our last Bubble updates of Season 1 at the end of the episode, but for now, let's dive into our first of 3 interviews. Imagine a mobile dating app like Hinge or Tinder, but instead of matching people with potential romantic partners, it matches humans with rescue dogs to help get more animals out of shelters and into foster care or adoption with a forever home. That's exactly what the team behind Clover Dogs has been building, and I sat down with their CEO, Julian, to learn more.
I'm Julian. I am the CEO of Clover Dogs, and we are based in Surprise, Arizona. Clover Dogs is essentially a discovery app for people looking for dogs to adopt through a dating app style swipe discovery. Before Clover, kind of like discovering dogs to adopt was very primitive, very directory based, almost similar to Craigslist in a sense where, you would search through all these different websites that had these kind of unorganized and overwhelming directories where you weren't really being able to kind of have a great experience seeing dogs, seeing if they match for you. The dogs weren't really given that great of a visibility. Like on a dating app profile, you get a chance to really kind of curate and create a perception of yourself to put out to the public. So we wanted to bring that over into basically like the dog adoption world, that kind of like really giving dogs their own profiles to give them the best visual appearance, to really surface their best abilities and surface their best personality. So we wanted to essentially remove and move away from that very overwhelming directory sense and go over to the first kind of mobile dating app look and aesthetic, but for dog adoption. We felt like just as emotional and engaging as dating apps were, there was nothing like that in the dog space. So that's what we wanted to bring to the world for sure.
So the idea from the start was built around it being a mobile app to capture that mobile dating essence. From there to today, as the product has come to fruition and evolved, is there anything else about mobile that presented either new opportunities or maybe some like business obstacles that you hadn't considered before? And 2, I'm also just curious what you're finding the platform is able to unlock for both shelters and adopters who might be more used to that experience you were describing before of like just scrolling through a traditional website.
So to answer your first question first about just like more opportunities that were able to pop up, I think kind of like the gamification opportunities that we really got to see because of mobile was something we didn't expect. We were very grateful to see where, now we can not only just make it a dating app, but we can make it, when you're kind of first putting in your preferences of what dogs you want, etc., we can completely turn that into this engaging game where you're looking at these friendly icons and being able to choose and look at these cute dogs early on. So mobile definitely gave us an opportunity to really gamify the app, make it more engaging than just the usual kind of like directory to discover dogs. But to your second question about like what extra elements it brought to the shelters and the adopters and the rescues was, a really big thing about dating apps is that ability to real-time chat, to reach out to somebody you see that you think you like, put out a feeler message, and then get a response back. So we're able to now do the same thing, put in our own quote unquote Clover Chat, which we call it, where potential adopters can see a dog they like, and instead of just, seeing it and being like, oh wow, maybe one day I'll be able to get to visit them, fully be able to send a chat message that the actual rescue and shelters see real time and be able to respond and say, oh, if you have a question about is this dog good with my 13-year-old son who has a lot of energy, now I can answer that specific question. So it just gives a lot more communication and transparency to both sides of both the adopter and the shelter.
I'd love to hear more about what the experience has been working with some of these shelters who have been testing it out. what are they experiencing? What kind of feedback are you getting from them as they, because they're also entering this kind of new tech empowered infrastructure that you've built?
100%. So a lot of shelters and a lot of rescues too, their main job, of course, is nowhere near tech. It's all about just getting dogs adopted. That's their number one priority. So for them, us being able to come and say, we're taking work off of your plate. You know, the old platforms they used to work with, they had to manually list every single dog every day, maintain those listings, update those listings, even if the smallest thing changed, like a dog's weight. Now we can basically take all that information and automatically update it inside the app. So now for them to be able to see kind of the innovation that exists, they're very grateful. So it starts off, they work with us behind the scenes. We first put on all their dogs, kind of like a one-time entry. Then from there, they interact with the app. So then from there, if they want to manually change anything that's not on their website, because we basically collect all their website changes and automatically change it. But if they want to, hey, you know, add an extra picture, if they want to kind of the same way where you really customize your dating app profile, if they want to add more customization there, they can, but it's very hands off if they want it to be, for sure. Shelters and rescues now are seeing how technology and AI can just lighten their workload 100x more, which I think before, since they were just so in the dog world, they weren't able to see and experiment. So it's great that we can kind of bring that experience to them.
What kind of stories are starting to trickle in? Is there anything that's any surprises that have come as people are actually using the app and you're starting to see more dogs enter the platform?
I mean, really just a lot of user stories about people unexpectedly enjoying the app as much as they do and treating it kind of similar to a dating app where, you know, we've seen pictures and videos where a full room of girls or boys, whatever it is, will just sit, you know, stream their phone to the TV and kind of just be swiping through different dogs with all their friends on the couch next to them, you know, commentating, spectating, oh, this dog's adorable. Can you imagine this? Blah, blah, blah. So we've been elated to kind of hear that this has became like a engaging experience you can share with your friends and has that inherent virality for sure.
That's awesome. As you look to the future, I'd love to hear more about just like what's next for Clover Dogs in general, but I'm also curious if there is anything else mobile specific that is also on mind.
Our mission is obviously number one, we want to get dogs adopted. We want to get dogs out of shelters, out of rescues, and into homes. So as we move forward for us, that looks like, you know, more of a fostering also functionality instead of just like, hey, you need to adopt this dog to be on the app. You can also join the app if you want to, you know, kind of try a dog out for a spin. So that really kind of like gets dogs out of shelters for short periods of time, which makes it easier for them to get adopted for sure. But then also really just kind of like a live 24/7 rescue element. Like if somebody sees a dog on the street and they usually will have to kind of like go online, Google the nearest shelter. But if you could go on Clover and say, hey, I just have this dog who's here. I'm in this city. Can anybody kind of house this dog for the next day or next few days? That'll kind of also be another functionality, kind of just like that 24/7 rescue element too. So for us, it really is just building a lot of mobile functionality to continue to really just get dogs out of shelters and out of rescues and off the street for sure.
Love it. The premise of this show is that the playbook for entrepreneurship and, you know, launching a business in general is changing dramatically thanks to all of these evolutions in technology, AI, software, even culture. And so what would be your playbook for someone who wants to launch a business and thinks that mobile is the right kind of anchor for them?
That's a great question for sure. I think first thing it would be take a second, get away from all computers, just sit down with a notebook and think, how do you want to change the world? For sure, I think if it's anything almost less than that, you're going to face a ton of competition by vibe coders who can build anything. So you need to have like a mission oriented element behind it to really be powerful. But then other than that, I would really just say in terms of mobile, study the App Store. Go on the App Store and study every single page on there, every category, see what's popular, and then see from there how your mission can essentially innovate and not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but really just kind of piggyback and improve on the most popular apps on the App Store for sure. I would say if you can find what you're mission oriented with and then find a way to implement inherent virality and what's already popular on the App Store, mobile-wise, you will absolutely be able to find a winner. Just to address common mistakes, I think when I first started Clover, I almost thought this is too niche. We need to be able to serve everything dog. What are all the dog apps? Whereas instead it was like, let's just figure out what the initial issue is and then dig the deepest in there. But in terms of like apps on the App Store, I was researching, obviously the typical, the dating apps, Hinge, Tinder, Bumble, etc. But there also are just a ton of different, and this is where I really realized Clover had legs, just community apps and meet people apps. And those were very popular. And a lot of them were very distinct and narrow and specific. So once I saw those, I realized as long as you understood your audience, there was going to be a market there for sure.
What is something you think most founders who are building startups right now are not paying enough attention to? Or what's a common mistake that you think a lot of entrepreneurs are making right now?
A lot of entrepreneurs are trying to go viral without understanding that there are only kind of specific audiences that can go viral. Like after 22 years old, the number and the amount of people that you actually talk to or reach out to on a daily basis shrinks drastically. So if you're trying to build a mobile app that is trying to go viral and you're not targeting younger people, it's going to be extremely tough as a founder for sure.
That makes sense. And then my second one is, what is the most memorable feedback that you've gotten in your career?
The most memorable feedback I've gotten, I would say, is just the ability to learn quickly and self-teach versus waiting for people to tell me what's important, waiting for people to show me things, etc. Just the ability to quickly go out, study something intensely, master it, and then be able to iterate it and teach it has been feedback I've seen of the best things about my career for sure.
Awesome. Before we wrap up, is there anything else about either your app specifically or your business, or just the process of building a business based on mobile that we didn't cover here today that you think others who are listening who might go through the similar journey that you did or be on the verge of doing so might want to hear? Any other insight or warnings or anything that comes to mind?
I think when it comes to the team, I think what you'll probably see going forward is a lot of founders trying to do it themselves or with a smaller, 2-person team, just because obviously AI, all the tools are there. I'm actually somebody who I feel like the faster you can find, even if it's not extra founders, but it's just a great mastermind group with a lot of people, the better. I know that helped us tremendously. Is me and Alexis had an idea. We could have tried to build it ourselves, but when we brought in Lucas and Emily, our other 2 co-founders, everything moved drastically faster because they actually had the expertise building, etc. And even just the extra insight about AI and automation they brought helped us move tremendously faster. So I think it's one of those things where the faster you can find, even if it's your own kind of like board, advisory board, etc., the better. Don't try to do things alone. 100% is what I would say. Is one thing I would try to tell founders who are going at it now and always hear, the less founders, the better. We can keep more equity, etc. Sometimes, a smaller part of a large pot is better than a larger part of a smaller pot.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great advice. Awesome. Julian, thanks so much. Congratulations on everything with Clover Dogs. The whole Bubble team is really excited about everything that you're working on, and we can't wait to see what's next.
Absolutely. Could not be more grateful for the entire Bubble team for everything they've done to help, but also for Bubble itself and their platform. So definitely appreciate it.
For our next interview, according to NASA, sea levels have risen twice as fast over the last 20 years as they did throughout the 20th century, and the pace is still accelerating. More severe storms and extreme weather events are making climate change a much less abstract and much more immediate threat. Land is a mobile app designed to help people track climate conditions and prepare supplies. I spoke with founder Andrew to learn more.
I'm Andrew Harsager. I'm the founder of Land, based in Brooklyn, New York. Land is a data-driven supply platform. It's helping people understand what their risk exposure is to weather hazards because of climate change, and then providing them with tools, resources, and elements to keep in their home that help improve their safety in those emergency situations.
I think you've been pretty deliberate about saying that Land is not a weather app.
Yeah, there really isn't much out there in terms of apps that look at climate specifically. And what I mean by that is it's zoomed out from weather. Everyone who uses an iPhone, for example, has a built-in weather app in their operating system. A lot of people have a favorite app outside of that. And that tells you what's going on today or this week or maybe next week. Do you need to bring an umbrella? Is there going to be a storm coming? That kind of thing. But those don't actually speak to the larger shifts that we're all seeing. The weather as an entity, its behavior in a more zoomed out way is changing. We have more intense storms, more frequent storms, different kinds of storms happening than we did 50, 20, even 10 years ago. A lot of places in the United States are seeing either increased rainfall, decreased rainfall, new kinds of storms. Even in New York City, where I'm based, a couple of years ago, the official climate classification was upgraded to humid subtropical. So literally, these are changes that are happening every day. And weather apps don't speak to that. They speak to what's happening in the immediate term, but that's not really great for people's long-term planning. Understanding, do they have the right systems in place to protect their families? Should they buy that property over there? Should they invest, their life in a change of moving to a new location if they get a job? What does that mean for them? So those are questions that are outside the scope of a weather app, and that's the area we're trying to target with Land.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how the idea for Land came about for you? And I'd also be curious to hear, at what point did it click that this was meant to be a mobile app specifically?
There was actually a really specific moment. A couple of years ago, I think it was in the summer of 2023, people who lived in New York at that time will remember that there was a moment in that summer where the sky turned a deep orange because of the smoke from wildfires that were coming down from Quebec. And of course, people in West Coast cities deal with that on an almost annual basis now. But it was quite surprising for New Yorkers. Not because that event was unpredictable. That smoke had been traveling down the eastern seaboard. Those fires had been burning for a month. But because it was very unusual, people didn't really know what to do about it. They didn't know, okay, well, I'm at work. Should I go pick up my kids from school? Should we go home? Is it safe to go outside? Is this the kind of thing that air conditioners filter out? Do I need to buy an air filter? Do I need to wear a mask? All of these kinds of questions. And I was working in Midtown at the time, and I watched that unfold in real time. Just professional people in the office see this apocalyptic looking event out the window, and the company didn't know how to provide guidance for them. The weather app didn't provide guidance. What does this mean? And it started to really unfold these kinds of questions that, we're dealing with a weather reality that's really unprecedented, and there isn't great public education on it. There's sometimes news segments. Certainly climate change is treated as a political issue when it really is, it's a scientific issue. And so people are scared, people are confused by it. They don't know how to prepare. And the preparation industry, such as it is, tends to not focus on things like climate. There is a retail industry around survivalism, around, disaster preparedness. And you have part of that that's about kind of like Red Cross and FEMA type stuff. But the larger kind of retail context there is actually more about kind of conflict. It's about saying, okay, what if the United States receives an EMP attack from another country, or somebody invades us? And it's this very kind of almost antisocial, kind of militaristic, kind of individualistic sort of environment. And that's, what we would normally call the like prepping industry. And they often reach for these kinds of scenarios that are not impossible, but quite implausible when you can actually look out your window and see the hazards that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis now. So I wanted to create Land as a pro-social environment, one that's really based in data. It's not based in fear. One of our mottos is facts, not fear. Saying, okay, you in this location, your trajectory for risk is going from, where it is now to where it will be in 5 years. There are certain steps that you can take to make yourself less vulnerable to those risks. And here's what those steps are. It's very straightforward. It's not about fear mongering. It's not about, casting blame for climate change. It's really just saying we're all living through this disaster together. What do we each need to do to be safe and to take care of each other?
That's awesome. What has the evolution been for the actual experience of the app? Once you knew that you wanted it to be something that was accessible, even right in people's pockets, there's the additional question of, well, how do people interact with that data? How do people interact with suggestions or, their local environment? What does it look like developing and maybe iterating on that
Mhm.
mobile app experience?
Yeah, well, mobile is an important platform for this. I mean, first of all, a lot of people live in areas where the risks that they are subject to are risks that would require evacuation from their home. So imagine wildfires, hurricanes, coastal flooding, things like that. Um, and so you need to be able to take this data with you. The other thing is we're operating in a space of the real world, of the physical world. You know, we're talking about stuff that's going on outside your home. And we're talking about physical objects that you would have inside your home to help prepare for those things. And so mobile's the right platform for that because you need that connection point between the physical world and the digital world in order to actually make the best use of the product. At Land, we have a massive proprietary storm events database going back for most hazards for over 30 years. Some hazards go back to the 1950s. That's combined with a lot of government data that helps people understand where they sit in terms of their kind of relative position of risks and how those are changing over time. All of that really, it can only exist on the web. You know, I've got massive databases. One of my databases has 200 million entries in it. And you need an interface to be able to deal with that. It's not that the data is so complicated. I don't need a 12-inch screen to show people how those trends are changing, but you need to be able to carry it with you and reference it. Use that to have access to your supply kits, know what's in there, know what the expiration dates are, all of those kinds of things. So everyone carries around, you know, effectively a supercomputer in their pocket with a camera attached. And, you know, that provides a really kind of critical interface point between the real world and that world of data.
Our team had the chance to speak with you before, just internally, and get to know more about what, you know, your story was and what you were working on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a memory of you mentioning taking some lessons or inspiration from like horoscope apps like CoStar and things like that. Can you speak a little bit to that? And at what point in the process did different inspirations help influence the trajectory of the app?
Well, I'm now on the third version of the app that's been released. And as each of those versions has gone out, you know, we're learning from users, we're hearing people's opinions, we're observing kind of how people use it and what they feel comfortable with. And originally, you know, the original idea was that it would be more of like almost like a fitness tracking app, you know, where your climate risks are ranked against one another. You get all your percentiles and your indexes and, you know, seeing how the points change from day to day and so on. But that ended up really not being the right display methodology to talk about climate. Climate's a really slow moving surface for one thing. So there's not that much that changes from day to day. And it has actually some of the same kind of probability issues as weather apps do. You know, if you use a weather app and it says, okay, there's an 80% chance of rain, there's a 90% chance of rain. You bring an umbrella and then nothing happens. You consider that the app was wrong. That's the kind of way that people tend to think about it, but that's not really how probability works. It's even worse for climate. You know, if you say, okay, your location is in the 71st percentile risk for a hurricane. 2 years later, it's in the 74th percentile. You know, your risk has meaningfully gotten worse, but in either case, it doesn't mean you will or will not have a hurricane. So people want prediction out of stuff like that, and that's really not what's possible. That said, we have an incredible reference point for a mode of communication that talks about kind of invisible, massive shifts that have an impact on things that you can observe in your day-to-day context, and that is the astrology industry. People often put a lot of stock in day-to-day horoscopes, and there's a kind of communication norm there where you've got these kind of invisible cosmological shifts that, you know, according to that lore, impact the stuff that is going on in your day-to-day life. It can provide you with certain guidance points, and a lot of people take that very seriously. And so I think that there's an interesting correlation there with climate communication, where you've got big, oftentimes invisible, slow-moving shifts, and they do impact things that are going on in your day-to-day life. Even if any given event, you can't say, well, that's because of climate change and this one wasn't. That's not possible, but it provides you with this kind of plain language communication style that is actually really good for interpreting big amounts of data, pulling from those daily reads, what are the things that you need to be paying attention to, and how do you contextualize those against the rest of your life? So the current version of Land is kind of an experiment in that type of climate communication. It's using, plain language. It's not talking about the kind of indexes that go up and down every day, even though there is a massive amount of data that feeds those daily reads. It instead speaks to people in a plain tone, and it, is something that's very human and helps them to understand that, this isn't an issue that they need to think about every day, but they do need to have the tools available working under the surface for them so that when something needs to get paid attention to, they have the information at their fingertips.
You said you're on like the third iteration of the app. Has there been any immediate feedback from current users on that latest version that has been either very validating or maybe even like very unexpected?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you get unexpected feedback all the time, and that's the beautiful part of user testing. And why on a platform like Bubble, you can make changes really fast, which is great. The feedback on the communication style has been overwhelmingly positive. I think people are kind of inundated with quantified self stuff at this point. People wearing their Oura rings, getting their Apple Watch data, the health app stuff, the weather stuff. There's a lot of data heavy quantification of stuff that we can do now. And so to have an app that can provide some of that functionality, but in a way that feels like it's a breather almost, they don't need to pay attention to numbers from day to day. What they need to know is, these larger term shifts. That has been great. And I think packaged within a pro-social brand identity, this has also been a really important thing that's resonated with our users. One person on the App Store called it prepping for the rest of us, which I really appreciated. It's, it's acting in response to a kind of retail category that most people feel is necessary, but they don't identify with how those things are marketed, how they're packaged, what the underlying purpose is. You have to kind of create a sense of aspiration for people in order for them to really feel like they want to participate in this brand universe. And we've been able to do that so far, according to the users, in a satisfying way.
That's awesome. Land is a fundamentally mobile experience. Does it have any web elements at all? Do you have any planned web elements?
The first version of the app actually we released as a web app, and we found that most people wanted to use it on their phones. So that was a really clear indication that it should move to a mobile platform. That said, there can be some interesting things in the future that we're not able to do right now on mobile that could make sense for a web app. So, that might be things like connections to real estate and insurance industry elements for people's individual lives, better management of people's individual supply kits, looking at things like expiration dates, expansion opportunities, reminding people about using things, cycling them, connecting to people's Amazon accounts, all of those kinds of things. There's a lot of opportunities that you can get when you have better screen real estate, but so far the core of the activity has been great on mobile, and we're quite happy with what that platform can do so far.
And just to make sure that I'm fully understanding the core activity on mobile, is it its actual supply, like inventory ordering?
Yeah, it's the daily reads. So there's the kind of data element and the retail element.
Okay.
So the data element is something you might look at every day. It's something that changes. You can look at your week ahead. You can get kind of seasonal readouts. You can also look at what happened in the past. What was this day like last year? What was it like 10 years ago, 20 years ago? So that's stuff that people return to. It's something you open up when your alarm goes off in the morning and you start to wake up and see some stuff on your phone. The retail side is where all of that gets operationalized in things that help keep you safe. So everybody gets a customized list of these supply kits, which each have between 5 and 10 items in them that are easy to purchase on Amazon, and monitor, your kind of ownership of those in the app. So that's a way to kind of look at, where are you in your kind of preparedness journey, and that provides a kind of customized shopping list, I guess, in a way. And then, as new features roll out in the future, that will be able to be even more personalized, and even more proactive. So this is maybe, I think, the next phase for us is to look at how you could use proactive shipping or proactive retail experience to help improve that kind of vulnerability even more. So for example, in the case of the the smoke event that happened in New York, that is a predictable event. That could be a scenario where, the app says to people, okay, in 10 days time, you're very likely to experience this smoke event. Do you want us to send you this package of N95 masks, deducted from your account, like the Starbucks app? And the people can very easily say yes to that. So I think that's the next frontier, is really tying the kind of retail opportunities more directly to the conditions that people are experiencing, so that it can become really tight, really safe for people, and really, great from a business context.
That was going to be my next question, was what do you think is next for the app? So that's really cool to hear. I guess sort of on like a more general note, how are you thinking about the evolution of the app for mobile specifically? Are there other native mobile aspects that are either part of the app but you want to expand, or that you haven't introduced into the app yet but want to?
Well, Maps is a big one. So location-based services for land. One of which, for example, is evacuation routes. So proactive evacuation route calculation. You can imagine a world where people who, as I mentioned earlier, people who are at a risk of some weather event that would require them to evacuate, like a wildfire, like a hurricane, if they proactively designate a secondary location that's safe for them, a relative's house, a friend's house, a hotel somewhere, wherever they would want to go, the app can proactively calculate the best route, maybe on a daily basis, and cache that to the user's phone. Maybe during a time of a crisis, during an active hazard, it can calculate that route every 10 or 20 minutes, so that even if the mobile network goes down, they still have those turn-by-turn directions based on the most recent successful traffic conditions to get to that destination safely. So that's an example of something that can only be done on mobile. The social aspects as well. You mentioned photos. This is a feature that hasn't been developed yet, but I think there's an interesting opportunity with photography to reinforce the idea that we're all living under the same sky. We're all going through this slow motion disaster together. And that said, it is a slow motion disaster. What do you observe? Does it make sense to kind of slow down and have a better connection with nature as these changes are happening? And photography can be a great lever to do that, and to connect with other people who are experiencing the same things you are. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Excited for what mobile can offer us.
I imagine that someone might be listening to this and they might resonate with your story. Either they know of a problem, maybe a complex data, heavy problem out there that they want to do something about, or maybe they have an idea for a business that they think mobile would be the right answer for. For someone out there who's listening, who may be in that position and wants to do something similar to what you've been doing, what would be your playbook for them?
I would say spend more time than you probably think you need to riffing on the concept before you start building. I think the temptation right now with platforms like Bubble and others, that it becomes very easy to build. You want to have the satisfaction of getting stuff out there, but engage with people, talk to your customers, talk to your friends, talk to people who are involved in similar spaces, and get their feedback. And that was true before our current landscape environment that we're in now, before the kind of tool landscape, and is still true today. The second thing I would say is, once you do start building, have joy with it. Don't think you need to copy the current landscape of apps that are out there. There are UI norms that are built into mobile app categories that I think we're about to break in really interesting ways. Given tools like Bubble and AI coding tools, I think we're about to enter an era of people getting weird with it. I think it's going to be kind of like when we got Kinkos in the 80s and 90s, what happened with zines, people being able to make cheap photocopies that were super creative, and they started riffing on the medium, having their own kind of crazy versions of content, things that express the ideas of sub-communities. I think we're going to enter a really interesting era with these kind of democratized platforms where people can create those niche opportunities, create it easily, get it out there, have it be, successful among a core group of people. I think it's going to be an explosion of creativity. So I'm really excited to see what happens.
I've never thought about it that way, with that exact analogy, but that makes a lot of sense. That's a really great way of thinking about it. I have two rapid fire questions that I want to end on. The first one is kind of just a hot take question. What is something that you think most founders, most startup entrepreneurs are either not paying attention to or a mistake that you see them making often?
I think a mistake I see a lot of founders making is focusing a lot on what the kind of core of the business is, the core insight, the core technology, whatever that element is that they feel is their kind of unique wedge, and packaging it in a brand that feels, like it's too belonging. It's too belonging in a category. Not finding a kind of brand voice that goes outside of this normal sort of startup AI speak. Find creative, weird names. Find who you're talking to. Like, what are the fashions of the people that you're talking to? What books do they read? What art exhibits did they go to? Reach a little further. There's a very kind of focus grouped voice, I guess, among a lot of startups. And you see that happen now in a kind of bad way with people who, have a great idea, they create their app, and they feel that they need to elevate that app into what they see being funded, and that makes it loses the differentiation point that you might get by embracing the fact that you're a single creative person. You don't have a board of directors that you need to answer to, at least yet. You can get creative with it, embrace your own voice as a founder, and see where that takes you. You can always dumb things down later, but it's very hard to go from a kind of mass voice to something more creative. It's easier to go the other way around because you might discover an audience that never knew you were there and they feel seen by what you've created.
I love that. That's a great answer. My next one is, what is the most memorable feedback that you've ever gotten in your career? Could be from a supervisor, from a user, from a colleague.
Well, it's very practical, but I think the biggest lesson that I've learned in my career is prototype early. Often don't be precious about the thing you created. Get it in front of other people and thank them when they say something bad about it. Because most of the time people around you are going to want to support you. People surround themselves with systems and people that make them feel good, which is wonderful. But that's not the whole story. People can believe in you and that's great, but you need to get your stuff in front of people who are skeptical about it in order to test where the edges are. And, just like with Land, when I had to pivot from this kind of fitness app to a different technique, I never would have gotten there if it weren't for people who criticized it, who didn't use it, who, said, oh, I don't want this. You have to make something, let them break it, let them criticize it, make a new one, see if the same thing happens. And don't be precious. Keep trying and trying and trying. And eventually you'll get to a point where the solution that's on the table is something you never would have found if you had tried to create it from the beginning.
Awesome. Is there anything else about either your business or about the process of starting a business via mobile that we didn't cover?
I think the right way to start a business is to listen to the problems of the people around you and don't feel that you have a preconceived notion of what format that it should take. You see, there's the kind of Silicon Valley funding cliche, is to have startup founders over here that have invented some kind of technology, and the best use case they can find for the technology is to help people locate the best restaurant around them, And it's like, okay, that's an example of, coming up with the kind of solution first and then working backwards into a problem. But if you have an open mind and you kind of listen to what people around you are thinking and saying, what they're worried about, and you can start to imagine what impact you can have on that. The mobile platform is incredibly flexible. It's also not right for all problems. So, I think it's important to always start with a problem first, find the right tools to solve it, and then do that iterative process to see if you've gotten it right.
Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed learning more about this. It's such a cool app idea and a really, really cool story. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
For our final interview, your hair can reveal a lot about your overall health, but pinpointing what's behind changes isn't always easy. For women, especially women of color, that challenge runs deeper. Medical research has historically fallen short on the data needed to help. MMARA is a mobile health tracking app built to fill that gap, and I spoke with founders Obi and Onyi to learn more.
Oni Chikuma, co-founder and COO, and I'm based in New Jersey.
And I'm Obi Chikuma. I'm co-founder and CGO, Chief Growth Officer, and I'm based in White Plains, New York.
MMARA, actually, it's a hair health tracking app that uses your data from your wellness and hair care habits to ultimately get to the root cause of your hair loss.
Awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more about the journey to get the product to where it is today? I remember from previous conversations that we've had with you as the Bubble team that it didn't necessarily start that way. And I'd also be curious to know, at what point did mobile as an anchor for the product come up? If that was a surprise or if that was part of the plan from the beginning?
No, I think where we are today is honestly all a surprise. We didn't expect to be a tech company. We also didn't expect to be a health company. We originally set out with kind of our core mission, which hasn't really shifted, but it's always been to essentially help women with their hair. Like that's really what we went into this doing. And so our very first app, or our very first product, I should say, similar to what we know is the customer journey, is we fixated on product first. Because, this was just us going into this, realizing that at the time, and to put this into some context, this was 2020. And so especially for us as Black women with textured hair, 2020 was a very different time. And especially right before that was a very different time for the types of products that were available. So like many people, we kind of thought that was the culprit. That was really why a lot of us were having a lot of these issues. And so our very first product was actually a website where we basically did a hair analysis quiz on you, and then we kind of connected you to product and we sold products. Did that for quite some time. It was through several iterations, so many customer interviews and discussions that we've actually made kind of the switch that we have today. And ultimately, what kind of led to that was, in this process of trying to help women with their hair, we really started to see a recurrence of issues. And a lot of them kind of pointed to hair loss being kind of one of the key issues that a lot of women were really suffering from. And so, we kind of pivoted into the hair loss space. But again, like customers at the time, we were really focused on the products they were using. We weren't looking inward. And it was after doing a lot of research and actually connecting to a ton of women who they actually used their hair loss to understand and ultimately diagnose other issues that they had. So for example, we had spoken to women who've self-diagnosed with lupus, and eventually it was confirmed by a doctor. But it was through her hair loss journey that she discovered that. And that's what kind of led us to realize that in trying to help women with hair loss, there's actually a massive health component that is currently unaddressed. Because what exists today is usually you get your hair loss diagnosis, and sure, you might have AGA, great, but what is actually the cause of that, right? It could be hyperthyroidism, it could be PCOS. So that's what kind of led us into the health space. And kind of adjacent to that was us realizing that the data, because when we first started, we were like, oh, we'll just kind of create a better diagnostic kind of support tool to help women understand their hair loss. The research isn't there. It's not there for women's health. It's not there for women's hair loss either. So that's why we actually realized we kind of need to build the system and the foundation to collect the data to even start to understand how symptoms show up in women, how hair loss kind of moves and evolves in women. And we realized the best way to do that is not through a single shot survey. It should be with something a woman can interact with every single day. And so that's actually what led us to realizing that the mobile app was probably the best kind of pathway.
Discovering that as the right platform, what has the process been like to discover the right user experience on mobile? Can you walk us through a little bit, like what does the app look like right now?
Yeah, I mean, that was funny enough. That was semi one of the easier things because a lot of women were doing these behaviors already. And us being, when we were kind of in the early days of the app, we were also kind of going through our own journeys and experiences. So a lot of us kind of organically participated in these online forums and these groups. And so we realized like women were naturally taking progress photos all the time. They would just post them in a group and kind of say, hey, can you guys take a look? Like, do you notice a difference? We noticed they were naturally journaling themselves. And so we really just took behaviors that we know they already do and just said, how can we actually make it productive though? How can we kind of standardize it in a way where we can pull real analysis and data out of this, as opposed to, you just taking random notes whenever you remember. And so that's how we kind of standardize it to create what we have is, the core of our app, which is our daily log, which you go in, you kind of interact with that as it makes sense, right? You don't do every single behavior every day. So just as you do things, you interact with it. And that's where we collect anything from observations on your scalp, your hair, the products you're using, all the way to what you ate that day, if you were active, if you've noticed any weird symptoms, maybe you had a headache, hormonal changes, anything like that.
As you're collecting all of this data, are there any groups or institutions out there that you've been speaking to who are interested in that data, because you're essentially filling the gap for users, but you're also filling this big scientific gap as well. And I'm just curious what infrastructure that might start to invite beyond just your business.
Yeah. I would say we definitely, so that's something we want, but we are candidly mostly focused on the user right now. So a lot of the organizations that we're partnering with currently are organizations where we know this data would be the most helpful to the users, or I should say the community members that they serve. So specifically groups that tend to have a higher population of women who are probably either going to interact with hair loss in the near future. So for example, like postpartum and like prenatal groups, or they're just already actively going through it. So like certain autoimmune associations and things like that. But we are very aware that this will actually be extremely helpful in filling that data gap. And so that's something that we 100% want to kind of explore as we kind of open it up to what those partnerships could look like.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what your team looks like and how the work is distributed and maybe how big the team is as well?
Yeah, so right now, me and Obi work on it. So it's three of us. So me, Obi, and Crystal, who is our CEO. Right now, for us, eh, Obi is the one that focuses on the product, and then we do have a developer, a part-time developer, who is helping with any bugs or any new dev opportunities that we're trying to launch from MMARA. For me, I am focusing on uh, building a network of potential partnerships for the app, and then our other co-founder, Crystal, actually is a marketing executive full time. So she pulls that experience from marketing strategy for our business.
Y'all mentioned that this began around 2020. Around when did the evolution into this more like healthcare and health tracking app start?
So that actually evolved around like 2023. That's when we realized that people were more interested in health, especially, after COVID, and women were, knowing Obi had mentioned that we don't have a lot of data related to women's health. And we realized that we have an opportunity that our hair speaks so much in the current state of our health that we can just pull that data and connect it to women's health. So that's when we got the Eureka moment, because a lot of businesses right now are just trying to provide not supplements of products to improve us. When we're like, let's focusing on what habits that are actually attributing to what's going on in our overall being.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
How has the response been to that evolution? Because I know that it sounds like this was all of these changes and decisions have been very strongly motivated by what you're hearing directly from the users. So when they actually see that what they've been saying has been heard and processed and taken in this new direction, I'm curious what that reaction is.
Well, I love that.
From what we've seen, because we've also built a community on a couple of platforms, and people are quite excited about something that isn't, let me take a topical, let me take a medication that could also cause a side effect of some sort. They're trying to look for a more holistic approach, and relatively new. So they're excited about it, but they definitely want to see more and see that, there is a result at the end of the tunnel. But it's a matter of building that trust, and we're slowly building that trust. And so far we have people up on the platform that are excited about it and are looking forward to seeing how it can impact their lives.
And I would say also, like, one of the coolest things is the amount of health professionals who are also really excited about this. Because I think we're at a really interesting point in building where a lot of people go to ChatGPT for a lot of their health issues. And ChatGPT, fun fact, it messes up around 60% of the time when you're specifically talking about women's health inquiries. And that's because we know the research and the data around women's health is poor. We know that like women and minorities didn't even have to be, or minority women didn't even have to be included in health studies until like 93. So we don't actually have that much time and that much information that we've collected. And that's not even to mention when you look at women's specific issues, that's a disaster in its own right. So I think even the doctors and the professionals, like when we approach them and talk to them, they're very excited about this kind of exploration because it is just widely known this gap exists and that it's kind of two sides of the coin. We know users are going to go and consumers and people in general are going to go and do their own research. We know they're going to try to manage their symptoms at home. We ultimately know that whether you tell them to use Mayo Clinic or not, whether you tell them to use ChatGPT, they're going to do it. So it's kind of like, how can we at least have stronger tools that we know aren't going to misguide them or mislead them? So that's actually been a really interesting kind of thing, is just seeing the excitement as well from the professional side and the more clinical side.
That's really exciting. In a similar vein, my next question is a favorite quote that I've heard before is you probably don't know what all might be broken in your app until real users start interacting with it. So on the same topic of like feedback and reaction, how has it been seeing your users actually interact with the mobile app? And has there been anything about that experience that has been particularly surprising or eye-opening?
So the first mobile app that we launched was 2023. So that was actually, it was right in conjunction with when we did the Bubble Immerse program. So that was the first mobile app we launched. And since then we've launched like, I don't know, I don't even count anymore. There's no point, but we've launched a lot. And so it has been a constant of like, oh, we really want people to kind of use this behavior. And I will say, I think the biggest thing I can give to people is scope creep will happen no matter how hard you think it's not going to. Because when we launched the first umpteen apps, there were just so many features. Because naturally, as we kind of spoke with users and they would get excited and say, oh, but I really wish you had this, and I really wish you had this. And we kind of took that as, well, let's literally build all of those little features that, you know, these users are asking for, as opposed to maybe kind of like taking a step back and thinking about what are they actually trying to get at? Like, why is it that they keep saying they want a blog within the app? Okay, because they want information, right? They want education. They want to learn more. So that's what they were actually pointing to. And so this app that we now have live, it's actually been live since January because we did a massive rebuild the end of last year. And so this one is, I would say, much more focused to one, what we want that action to be, which is we obviously want you to go in, log your habits, log your information, but then we also just want to provide you information right away. So it's the next largest piece is that insights page where you're going to get that personalized information. So that was very much a kind of constant learning of how to interpret what people are saying, and also knowing how to kind of discern like what actually makes sense to build at this time, because I think it can be really easy when you have someone who says like, I want this thing, to just build it without actually really thinking like, is that actually ultimately contributing to the usefulness of the app? And great if that one person uses the feature, but that's not necessarily how we kind of want to build it. So I would say how we build has shifted a lot since that very first app, and really just, again, it's really deciphering kind of what actually makes sense.
A good segue into my next question, which was going to be looking at the app now versus 2 years from now. Where are your heads at there? Yeah, in general, what is next for MMARA and business in general? I'm curious about, and then also mobile specific, how you're thinking of evolving within that ecosystem.
Yeah, I can kick it off talking about the app specifically. The app, it's kind of funny. I I'm actually very excited for the shifts that I think are going to happen. And I think the biggest shifts that we've noticed is it taking more of like a legitimate clinical position, if that makes sense. So even the way that we're collecting data and the way things are structured. And one of the big things we're doing right now is actually looking to partner with clinicians, multidisciplinary, of course, because this is hair loss is a very holistic issue. No one practice or practitioner can really answer all of it. So kind of getting all of their input on to how a lot of the data collection is really gathered. And the reason we're doing that is because we ultimately see this product like, yes, it's a log. Yes, you'll have your insights, but where we kind of see the power coming in is when we actually can integrate an AI. And we're intentionally not using agentic AI because it hallucinates too much. And as I just said, it's not good around women's health. So really building our own that is able to find those patterns in your personal behavior. And with the true goal of honestly illuminating things that are missing in the way that we even talk about and discuss women's health. I mean, that's, I think, what I'm the most excited about is really going to be that discovery of this is, maybe how we thought that symptoms showed up for this illness, but actually this is what our user data is showing us, right? These are kind of the new things we're starting to learn about women's bodies and hair loss through the AI that we're going to build. So that I think is the kind of biggest, I'm going to say near term, but the biggest kind of near term thing that we're really looking to build out. So I'm excited for that in terms of the app itself.
And then as for partnerships, Obi had mentioned, any practitioners that focus on hair loss or just general medical practitioners. But I also think it's important that we're partnering up with organizations or brands that do specify supporting women's health or hair loss. So right now, we've actually, there's a function that's currently in beta supplements edition in our app, and connecting with brands that do align with that and seeing if we can pull customers or their clients in and checking out the frequency in which they are taking those, those supplements and seeing it how it progress with their overall hair growth journey. And then just any other, since we're more than just, a hair health tracking app, this is also a wellness app, aligning ourselves with other individual wellness professionals as well, getting their clients on it to try out and possibly collaborate there. That's something we can see in the future, even closer to. As soon as possible.
I was going to say I'll add one slightly further, but I would argue still near term, because near term I feel like in startup world is anything under 5 years. So I'll still say near term. But to that kind of point of where we're kind of both alluding to is ultimately getting that integration with hospital systems and clinicians, because at the end of the day, the true power I think in what MMARA is building is going to be it's shedding light on some diagnostic improvements we can make, but also in preventative health, right? So that's like definitely kind of the, again, 5 years, I won't say alternate, but 5-year angle that we're kind of playing for.
Towards the end of our interviews, I like to ask kind of a playbook question for anyone who might be listening and resonating with your story and journey and might be find themselves in a similar boat. What would be your playbook for X? And in your case, I actually have two playbook questions. The first is, if someone is out there listening and they have an idea for a problem that they see, that they feel passionate about, that they want to solve, and they think that maybe even mobile might be a possible solution for them, what would be your playbook for someone in their shoes to try and realize that vision and get an app out there with real users? Right. And then my second playbook question for y'all's use case specifically, since MMARA has been through so many iterations and evolutions, if there's anyone who finds themselves with a business or a cause that they're passionate about, but is also maybe finding that they might be just at that first realization that like, oh, this might be something else, or this might be something even bigger than I was originally thinking. I'm curious what your playbook might be for them, and what your thoughts are for someone who might want to, might discover that they need to iterate a lot in that way.
I think one of the biggest, I want to say, misnomers in kind of entrepreneurship and startup world is that there's like this pivot. And it's always described as such, when in reality, you should be pivoting every day. Like that's essentially what you're doing, right? Like every iteration we had was a pivot. It was something that we realized was not working and wanted to change, and we redid it and launched it. So I think reframing what your focus is, because I think why it happened and why it happened so easily for us is that we really have always gone into this with a problem to solve. How we got there was not a concern, in the sense that if we needed to change the solution because what we had wasn't working, cool, because it's not solving the problem. And so I think when I kind of give that advice to folks of a playbook, it's really, one, always make sure you're obsessed with your problem, not your solution. If you find that you are more obsessed with your solution, this will be a very painful process for you. Kids are going to have a lot of breakups with that solution. And you also may be less willing to kind of move, even though kind of everything is telling you you should. And to not see it as a failure, but as you just getting one step closer to actually solving your problem. So that would kind of, I think that's like the biggest, because I don't know anybody who hasn't been extremely iterative, like, and again, we just maybe not think of it that way because we're always told like there's going to be this big aha pivot moment where everything will fall into place. No, you're going to have several of those all the time, especially if you are staying close to your customer, and that's a good thing, right? I'll pause there because I forget the first question.
Just in general, your playbook for someone who wants to, who has that problem that they're really passionate about and wants to realize a business based around a mobile app.
Yeah, I think honestly, just start talking to people and really understand though their behavior around like, okay, you want a mobile app. And I feel like it's funny because we're kind of the opposite. Like we didn't start with a mobile app. We're like not like I am an engineer, but not. I didn't think I would be at a tech company. I thought I was going to be at a beauty company. So that's I think mobile can be kind of sexy at times. A lot of people want to immediately jump into it, but I think it's really important that you understand, okay, what is the problem you are trying to solve and what is the user behavior around it? If people do not normally interact with this thing on a daily basis, or this is not something normally they check in on regularly, maybe, that could change. Maybe you still have a mobile app and maybe the way that you kind of encourage engagement is different. But I think that's kind of the first key step, because that's really what made it obvious for us. We were trying to use these snapshot moments when we realized like that is ultimately actually where the massive gap is that we don't have the data that's collected over an extended period of time. So how do we actually do that? How do we actually take behaviors they're already doing? We know they interact with these things at least weekly. This is a very normal thing. So we're not asking women to do a behavior that is unnatural to them or that feels kind of like a burden, right? Because we don't want that to hinder adoption. So that's when we realized it made sense for us. So I think it's really understanding your user behavior. And is it going to be a massive shift to get them to use a mobile app? Like, is that going to be so painful, or are you actually simplifying maybe a process they already do? I think that's kind of the biggest question. And that really just comes from talking to people.
I mean, I feel like Obi kind of summed it up, but for us, I think every day it's constantly knowing that we're believing in what we're building. And she had mentioned it before, don't be obsessed with the solution, but the actual problem. I think that just goes for any type of business that you are actually starting. And then I think, again, it's important to be an active listener. I mean, we had started completely different, realized that the market that we were entering was super saturated, that there's already enough support or solution there. Let's look at something different. And we know that an avenue for building a business, a mobile app for women's health is something that is still lacking, and still lacking even with us being present. Understanding what that pivot from trying to sell products to now realizing that like women need more support in the health sector. How could we do that? Women are obsessed with their hair. All right, how could we tie that to improving our health? And that's where we're seeing a great opportunity to help support the business, the women, globally. We're starting with the US right now, but I think that's really important. Just making sure that we're constantly listening.
I'd like to end with 2 quick rapid fire questions. And the first one, I think we've already started talking about. And to begin with, what is something that you think most startup founders are not paying enough attention to, or a common mistake that you think they're making?
I actually think one is competitors, but like really taking seriously why because I think especially initially, and this is kind of coming from some of my early days of working with a lot of startup founders, but taking competitors seriously into really wondering why it is maybe they're not doing things your way and just making sure you have a clear distinction and a clear reason as to why you are doing it differently. And I say this because I've met several founders who will say, well, they're not doing X, Y, and Z because, they kind of disregard it. And that ends up being kind of one of the reasons that they dissolve. And I also think in terms of how we've positioned ourselves, being aware that, okay, we had this amazing idea in the beginning, but it's saturated and tons of people are doing it. So maybe that's not going to be the best way because we know the problem still exists. And sure, we were maybe doing it a little different, but being really honest in we needed to not only differentiate ourselves more to actually stand out from competitors, but also because it's clear it's not actually solving the problem. So maybe we actually need to approach it in a completely different way. And obviously that's scary because you're building something that there is no playbook for because there is no one similar. But I think honestly, that's where like the real excitement of what it could be comes from.
I also wanted to piggyback on that if there is a competitor directly, a direct competitor for us or for whoever's business, that let that not be a distraction because you still have something. And it's great that you're having competitors. That means that you are entering the market at the right time. So just making sure that you're not distracted by any other businesses that are coming or that are coming into the woodwork that are similar to yours.
That's a great way of thinking about it. That's awesome. My second rapid fire question is, what is an example of the most memorable feedback that you've ever received in your career? It could be user feedback, or it could be colleague feedback or mentor feedback, anything like that.
Honestly, I think it's funny because it's actually technically not like direct feedback to the product, but to what we're doing and like our mission. And it's really just the recurring random like DMs I'll get on TikTok that just say, keep going. We really need this. Like that's honestly, like I'm telling you, when you are having a bad day, that can just like juice up your spirit for the next 3 weeks. And so to me, that's, and I say recurring because it happens constantly. Because I do push a lot of content out. Even if it's just educational, it's not always just promoting the app on my TikTok account. And like, so that's where a lot of them reach out, but that has by far been the most powerful. And the women who just will become extremely vulnerable in sharing their hair loss story, their health story with us and just saying like how important it is that someone is taking this seriously and just thanking us for that. That just keeps me satiated.
We did actually get a feedback that I really stuck with me some time ago. And it was basically actually indicating that they thought it was actually quite exciting that we are connecting our wellness habits to our hair care to focus on what's causing hair loss. Because again, before it's more of like, all right, you're experiencing hair loss, product, some treatment, but not really tying in what's going on. That was like indicated that we're doing something right. And that's always something that's motivated. I know I'm doing something right. It may take some time for it to land, but we're going to get there.
Absolutely. I know that we're up at time. Is there anything about either your business in particular or about building a business for a mobile app in general that we didn't cover that you want to talk to our listeners about?
I think with building, a business in general, don't underestimate the trust you need to build with your users. I think now because it's super easy to launch a company, frankly, and with, people are launching AI apps like every other day. I do think that the future success of a lot of these are gonna come from one, being authentic, but two, your ability to really just build that trust with your user. And so I think that's something that we, again, even our decision to not use agentic AI, when it'd be super easy to just build a wrapper on ChatGPT, but knowing that that would be a huge sacrifice, right? Because we know we'd be giving out false information. We ultimately know we wouldn't be contributing really much to the industry at that point either. So taking it kind of the slow way, the slow and honestly even riskier way, but in hopes and with the focus of really maintaining that credibility and that trust. And so I think that's been a kind of a big shift, I feel like, as of recently, just because of how quickly it is to kind of launch products like these.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show. Really fascinating to hear about your story. Congratulations on everything that you've achieved so far with MMARA, and all the best for what's next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Clover Dogs, Land, MMARA, and their founders, make sure to take a look at the links in our show notes. At Bubble, we've had the privilege to meet and spotlight all three of these businesses as part of our Launch Lab initiative, so please check them out. And if you have a business built on Bubble for web or mobile or both and would like to be part of our program, you can find a link in the description to apply. I also just want to shout out that recently a few members of our team actually flew out to Arizona with a film crew to meet the whole founding team behind Clover Dogs and learn more about their story. We just published that story as a video, and yes, it features some very adorable rescue dogs, so please check that out on our socials. Okay, some Bubble updates for our final episode of Season 1. Let's get into it. First, we just made it a lot easier to get your Bubble launch in front of the public. As one part of this, we're introducing a completely revamped app gallery, now featuring app profiles and upvote leaderboards. Think of it like Bubble's version of Product Hunt. Another part of this is a new free tool our marketing teams launched in beta, built on Bubble, of course, called the Launch Kit. All you need to do is link your live app, and our tool generates a marketing and brand kit based on your messaging, branding, and tone. You'll get social copy, email copy, and 9 image variants, including brand imagery. Second, in case you missed it, Bubble's API connector can now automatically read and understand the full structure of a JSON response, making every field directly usable in your app, workflows, pages, expressions, without any extra setup. This is especially useful if you're building with any LLM APIs like Anthropic or OpenAI. Give it a try in your own app today. Last, the mobile plugin editor is in alpha and is now available to everyone. Beta will be coming soon, which will open all third-party libraries to plugin devs, but we already have over 550 mobile plugins in the marketplace alone. Very exciting stuff. What kind of guests or businesses would you like us to speak with for a potential Season 2? Please let us know in the comments, and please be sure to leave us a like or even a review. In the meantime, that does it for our final episode of Season 1. Thanks so much for listening to The New Build. We'll see you soon.